Hey guys, Mr. Davis here. For this next section, I want to go over some of the objectives of what I want to cover. So, first off, I want to explain the process of evolution by natural selection. Second, I want to explain the concept of adaptations and how they pertain to evolution and natural selection. And lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how this applies to modern environmental science by looking at how a population of insects can become resistant to a pesticide. And this is a key factor when we look at the future of our food supply and how we interact with our environment. All right, so let's take a look here. So first off, this gentleman that I have above me, you might not recognize him. This is a picture when he was younger, but this is Charles Darwin. So he was an English naturalist, and what he observed while traveling through different parts of the world was that organisms and a population differ slightly from each other in their form, their function, their behavior. Specifically, what he noticed was that there are certain differences that are hereditary. All right. So these are the traits that we inherit, the traits that you're born with. All right. This is not stuff that you gain during your lifetime. This is stuff that is going to appear as a result of your genetics. All right. So what this is looking at is, let's say, your parents both have brown hair, and so as a result, you have brown hair because that's that dominant gene that's going to do that. Okay, that's just an example, and I know there's recessive genes, but let's just go with that. All right. Now, Darwin proposed then that the environment exerts a strong influence over which individuals are going to survive. Specifically, what he was arguing was that some individuals are born with certain traits, and the environment may select and make those traits more beneficial and more useful. Okay? So, what he was saying here is that, okay, in a population, you're going to have little differences that pop up between different organisms. And he did not propose a mechanism for how these differences arrived because he didn't have any knowledge of genetics. But those slight differences may confer a slight advantage at one point or another. And if it does provide an advantage, then it will be selected for and those traits will be passed on. So this is what he considered evolution by natural selection. So natural selection is the process by which individuals that have favorable variations and are better adapted to their environment will survive, reproduce more successfully, and they will pass on those traits. Evolution then is the changing characteristics of a population from one generation to the next. And it happens in between generations, not in one lifetime. Okay. So evolution is a process that takes time for it to occur. And it happens over the difference of several generations, not just, oh, boom, now it's done. No, this is something that happens successively, and it takes time for that adaptive trait to spread through the population as well, for them to shift towards more of them having it. All right, so above me, you can see kind of a weird looking giraffe, and this is kind of the classic example of how evolution affects a population. So let's take a look at how natural selection would affect a change in a population. So Darwin thought that that nature will select for certain traits such as sharper claws or whatever because the organism with these traits is going to have a better chance of surviving. So for giraffes, the classic example is that a longer neck helped them out. See, with the longer neck, a giraffe was able to not only browse at things that were, shoulder height, but also reach that neck way up into the trees and get access to food that other animals weren't. So as the population goes on, the individuals that have more access to food, they're able to reach farther up into those trees, reach all of the different browsing material that they can feed on. They're going to survive while the individuals with the shorter necks are not. And this helped that giraffe specialize to doing that. Okay, so it made there a food source available for the giraffe that other animals couldn't get to, and it allowed it to use that resource and ensure its survival. And that's the idea here. It's not that the giraffe stretching its neck somehow made it longer. No, 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 no. What is happening here is that some giraffes had a slightly longer neck, and that was beneficial to them. And it's been selected for that a long neck is good for giraffes. All right. Nature has kind of weeded out the shorter necks there because they're not able to get to certain foods as easily. All right. So what this is called is an adaptation. So the adaptation is the process of becoming adapted to an environment. It's a little circular, but what it means is that there's an anatomical, physiological, or behavioral change that improves a population's ability to survive in a given environment. So Darwin's theory was based off of his observations. So he observed that tortoises that lived on islands with tall cacti had long necks, and the tops of their shells accommodated for that neck to be able to stretch way up. So they had this weird high arch on their shells, and you can see one over this way, over to that side. You can see that tortoise there has that weird high arch, and it's got that long neck that it's got down at the moment. But tortoises that live on islands with a lot of short grass and not a lot of stuff to browse on that's up high, well, they didn't need that. So they've got shorter necks, and the top of their shell sticks out further, and they just go ahead and they browse across on the grass that's on the ground. So they don't have to have that adaptation. And by looking at the environment and looking at the animals that lived in it, Darwin used this hypothesis that there's going to be natural variation in the species, and the ones that have the luck of getting the right adaptation are the ones that are going to survive, pass on those genes, and be more successful in their environment. Okay, so what does this then mean? Well, what it means is that not only are the individuals going to survive better in their environment, but their environment may be changed by them a little bit too. So you see this really beautiful bird above me, this bright red bird. This is called the Hawaiian honeycreeper. So this is a process called coevolution, all right, in which two species influence each other and cause both of them to evolve. So when two organisms evolve into a long-term kind of interaction there, you get this thing called coevolution. And the good example of this one is the Hawaiian honeycreeper. It has a long curved beak, which you can see right up there, and it uses that to reach nectar at the base of the flower. The flower then has its structures that ensure that the bird, when it feeds on it, gets some pollen on its head, and then the next flower that the bird feeds on is going to get pollinated by that. So what you end up with is a situation where both of these are being helped by this. So in coevolution, the honeycreeper's adaptation is a long curved beak. But what's the adaptation for the flower? Well, it actually has to have two. The plant has two different adaptations. The first one is it's got to have something that the bird wants to eat, so it produces a sweet nectar. All right. So inside the flower, there's a sweet, sugary liquid that's produced there that attracts the bird. The second, though, is the flower's structure that forces the bird's head into a specific position when it wants to eat that nectar. So the bird has to curve its beak down the flower, and then there's that part of the flower that's going to rub on the top of the bird's head that's going to deposit pollen there, and the next flower the bird feeds on is going to get that pollen transfer happening. That's coevolution. Both of these plants, both of these organisms, the plant and the bird, have traits that help ensure their survival. The bird has a food source, and it has a special beak that allows it to access that food source. And by the flower having that long shape, it ensures that this bird is going to keep coming to this type of flower. All right? The second then is the flower being shaped in this way ensures that the bird will interact with the pollen. All right? That's coevolution. Both of them have specific adaptations that have helped them in a specific situation. But then we've got this other thing called artificial selection. And we already talked about this a little bit. If you can think way back to our first active reading, and it talked about what people did, how we would pick traits that we liked more. Well, that's artificial selection. That's the selective breeding of organisms by humans for specific desirable characteristics. And one example you can see right above me. Look at that thing. That's a watermelon from the 16th century. All right? So that's a watermelon that's basically 500 years old. All right? Now, you can't go and find a preserved watermelon that's 500 years old, but you can find a painting of a watermelon from that time. Now, this watermelon looks a little differently. First of all, those seeds are huge. Most of you guys, when you go out and you buy a watermelon at the store these days, you get a seedless watermelon. You don't even have to worry about that. Second, you might notice that if you look at those seeds, they're growing in these like chambers and they've got this kind of swirl thing. And then lastly, if you look at the center of the watermelon, you get this big white area right there in the middle. Okay, well, if you look at a modern watermelon, even if it's not a seedless, so let's say you get a seeded watermelon, all right? You've got the red top there, you got the seeds in it kind of dispersed throughout it, and then when you get down to the base, you have a thin white area before you get to the green rind. Well, that white area used to extend all the way through the watermelon to provide structural stability for the melon. But what we have done is we've looked at the melons and we've selected for ones that have less of that white area and more of the sweet red part of the watermelon. Yeah, so we have actually intentionally picked watermelons that were bigger and sweeter and had more juice to them and had more of the red part. It's this chemical called lycopene. It's also what makes tomatoes red, and it's really, really good for you. It's actually a really healthy food. So that was all a series of traits that we wanted in our watermelons. So we picked the seeds from watermelons that showed these traits. We planted those, harvest them again, pick out the seeds from the best watermelon, go, this is a great watermelon. We should save the seeds from it. Save those seeds, plant them again. Keep doing that over and over and over again. And we encourage the traits that we like to show up more and more. Over here, yeah, over here. That's where I'm going to put it. I've got another little diagram there, and you see at the very top, there's the wolf, that wolf ancestor. All right, that's the ancestor of all modern dogs. Yeah, your dog, if you have a pet dog, is related distantly to a gray wolf somewhere in the European Asian continent area, somewhere in what's called Eurasia. It's that central area between Europe and Asia. Somewhere in there, people started domesticating wolves, started giving them food, encouraging them to come around, helping, raise their pups. And what we did was we selected for wolves that were less bitey, so less likely to bite us, less likely to turn on us, ones that were more gentle. We selected for ones that were more playful. So that's why we have dogs that are super playful. And then once we've done that, we just started selecting for weird traits that we like, which is how you have all of those different breeds of dogs over there. All right. And you can see maybe and recognize some of the dogs. Like I can see a Shar-Pei. You get the Pomeranians. You've got the Huskies over there. You've got Collies. All of these different dogs arose because we just kept going, well, I like that trait, and we'd breed those dogs to show that trait. That's artificial selection. So fruits, grains, vegetables, they're all basically produced by this. Humans have saved seeds for a long time that had the largest and sweetest fruits or grains, and farmers have directed the evolution to produce larger and better crops, or loyal and great dogs that are good at certain things. That's what artificial selection really is. Dogs have been bred for these same characteristics. All right, so now let's take all of this and talk about this concept of resistance. So resistance is the ability for an organism to tolerate a chemical or disease-causing agent. Guess what, guys? You actually use this all the time, okay? So An organism may be resistant to a chemical when it contains a gene that allows it to break down that chemical into harmless substances. Humans promote the evolution of resistant populations by trying to control pests and bacteria with these chemicals. But guess what? It works the other way as well. You yourself have become more tolerant to certain things that other animals are not. And one of the best examples of this is chocolate. Chocolate contains a chemical called theobromide, which is extremely toxic to cats and dogs. However, humans have evolved the ability to process this so well that you really can't eat enough chocolate in order to get sick from it. If you weigh 150 pounds, you would need to eat over 9 pounds of chocolate to get a 50% chance of a lethal dose. Okay, look, you're gonna get sick from just eating that much food before you get sick from the theobromide. Meanwhile, most dogs, a 300 milligram dosage of theobromide is enough to kill them. Yeah, there's a huge difference between that. That's a couple of ounces versus a couple of pounds, all right? You can handle so much more of this than most other animals can. Humans have evolved this because we're kind of like super omnivores. We have really pushed our system to be able to eat as many different things as possible, which opens up more food sources for us than almost any other animal on the planet. Okay? We are extreme generalists, meaning we will eat almost anything. We really will. I mean, and trust me, if you don't believe me, look at some of the stuff on your shelf. I mean, like, hot sauce that's made from plants literally trying to produce a chemical to keep us from eating them. We just grew them to make them hotter intentionally. Yeah, that's what we do. But on the other side of it, we also try and control things like mice and bacteria and bugs, and we use different chemicals to try and control them. But when we overuse them, it offers the possibility for those organisms to survive, and those that have that little difference that lets them survive a little better, they'll pass that on. So pesticide resistance, this is a good example of this. So say a pesticide is sprayed on corn to kill grasshoppers. Now, most of the grasshoppers die, but those that survive have a special gene that lets them break down whatever this poison is. All right. Those surviving insects will pass that resistance on to their offspring. So each time the corn is then sprayed, more resistant grasshoppers will enter the population. Eventually, the entire population will be resistant, and that'll make that pesticide completely useless. All right, so let's take a quick look at this idea of something becoming more resistant. All right, so you start off with insects that are sprayed with an insecticide, and only a few survive. It's these light brown colored ones here, okay? So a couple of them survive. The survivors then are going to pass this trait for insecticide resistance on to their offspring. All right. So you'll see that, maybe you have a recolonization of the original type, but then you've got more of these light brown ones as well. So then you spray the pesticide again, and now the problem is you've still got plenty of these light colored ones here again. When the same insecticide is used again and again and again, eventually what you're going to do is you're not going to have any more of the, original dark brown ones that are represented here. What you're going to have is a population that is completely resistant to that pesticide, and you either have to spray so much pesticide that is now toxic for humans, and that's unsafe, and we can't do that, or you're going to end up with a population that's so resistant to it that no amount of spraying is going to help. All right. And this is a continuing problem that we face with this. And it's not just in insects, it's also with bacteria. So another big problem that we're facing is we're doing the same thing right now with antibiotics, where we are overprescribing antibiotics. And as a result, we are getting bacteria that are super resistant to antibiotics. And we just can't treat people with certain antibiotics anymore. So this is a continuing problem that we're facing. All right. So that is the, long and short of pesticide resistance. All right. So let's go back over these objectives again and make sure that you understand. All right. So quickly to review, you should be able to explain the process of evolution by natural selection, which is traits will arise in a species and the environment may select for those traits that are more beneficial. Adaptations are the collection of different traits that an organism has that will allow it to survive better in its environment. And then lastly, you should be able to describe the steps by which a population of insects becomes resistant. So first the pesticide is used, some of the organisms survive, all right? Reuse of that pesticide encourages those adaptations, and eventually the pesticide is useless. Kind of a little four-step sort of thing. All right, so there we go. That's the breakdown of adaptation, natural selection, and pesticide resistance for you. If you have any questions, of course, always let me know. Otherwise, take care, have a great day, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.